Greetings. I'm Brian Tuscan, host for Cop to Corporate, and today's special guest is Caitlin Cusimano. And Caitlin spent 7 years in law enforcement, and she had put a comment on one of my posts about leaving recently, mid-career, to work in the private sector. And I pinged her and I said, would you be interested in telling our brother officers and sister officers in blue your story, especially the ones on the fence that want to leave mid-career, and just to kind of hear Caitlin's story. So Caitlin, welcome to the podcast. And if you could just give a little about yourself, where you're located at, how long were you in law enforcement, what did you do? And then we're going to get into the meat and potatoes of why did you leave? So
Sure.
Without further ado, Caitlin Cusimano.
So thank you for having me, first of all. So I am based in North Carolina, and I spent about 7.5 years working for my department. If you count training, which I really don't, I count sworn time. So 7.5 years sworn, but 8.5 total. So I've been in law enforcement really since before I could drink alcohol legally. So I was 20 years old. I went to the academy. I got picked up at 21, and I was on patrol the entire 7.5 year stint I had. I worked for, I guess it was like a mid-sized department. We had about, I think maybe 160, 170 sworn, about 300 total if you include the non-sworn personnel. So I did a few things at the department. So I was able to go to a lot of schools. They were really good about that. So if you wanted to, go to a training for investigations, they would send you to whatever you want as long as you had a career trajectory, which I did at the time, which was I wanted to teach. I wanted to investigate. So they let me kind of lead the way as far as my training goes. So about 4, maybe 5 years in, I became a field training officer, which I'm sure you're familiar with FTO. So I did that for a couple of years up until the time I left. I was actually training a recruit during my last week at the department, which was funny. So I also did training aside from field training. So I had my general instructor certification through the state of North Carolina, which I don't know what state you were in and how things were done, but in North Carolina, general instructors are the only ones that are allowed to teach the state mandated lesson plans for us to keep our certification. So I was one of the few, actually our department had a lot, but I was one of the ones within the department that taught the state mandated lesson plans. I was also on the training team, which we picked what classes we wanted, the department to have that year. I was on the active shooter response training team briefly. COVID kind of messed that up, but what that team was is we went out to the community and kind of helped teach businesses, churches, sometimes school staff how to respond to active shooter threats. So it's kind of in a nutshell what I did. It was mainly, training and patrol. I did a lot of investigative things from a patrol standpoint. Our department was really good about letting you kind of run with that, which helped geared me towards my corporate career. My second career is, the investigative aspect. So, overall I had a good time, but I'm happy that I made the jump.
Well, what's awesome and why I wanted you to share your insights is you spent all of your time on patrol, and patrol is the backbone of policing. And I loved patrol when I was on patrol. It's unpredictable. Every day is a mixed bag. But for you to spend 7 years in patrol, what that shows others out there that are interested in a corporate career, that you can gain all the skills and training and all of the body of work to be successful in a private sector career. Now, you're fresh out. You work for a large online retail company, one of the largest in the world, and you're specializing, what is it, loss prevention?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Tell me about what made you think about leaving law enforcement, because it's usually a gradual progression, or some people just like, hey, I'm done, I want to leave. What was your tipping point?
So for me, it was gradual. And I really didn't think about what started my looking into different career paths until recently. So, and this is what I think is the origin. I can't be certain, but I think this is when the decline started happening. So I was actually in a shooting a few years ago, and the reality of that did not set in for a couple years. I just kind of brushed it off. I was really new whenever it happened. And then, a couple years after it kind of set in, like, oh man, obviously you expect things to happen at work. You're a cop, crazy stuff happens all the time. But whenever the big incident happens, it affects people differently. So, a couple years in or after that happened, I kind of just started thinking of, I want to get off patrol. I want to get off the street, but do I want to stay in law enforcement? Do I want to, just be a detective, or do I want to get out completely? So it was a slow progression just because I did love the job so much. I really did. I focused a lot on getting my investigative classes built up because I was thinking more along the lines of like a detective position, kind of staying in it. But then as more years went by, I really just kind of felt such a disconnect between myself and the job. Like, I used to love it so much, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate. And my love kind of dissipated, and I felt that the more I looked into the corporate world, I saw that I can do essentially the same job, just a little different with less or maybe just different stress, from behind a desk with, a little bit more, I don't want to say support, but a different environment to be in. So that's really kind of what pushed me out, is that I saw what my options were. And a lot of that really came from building a LinkedIn profile and seeing other people that were also in law enforcement that switched over to a corporate position. And I kind of followed a few people and what their career transition was and how it went. And it kind of gave me the, go ahead that, I can make it. Because I think that a lot of people get into these government jobs. Like, I was in a government job for almost 10 years, it was a long time. And you kind of maybe not get told directly, but you're given like a safety blanket of, as long as you do your work, you're not going to get fired, you're going to have a retirement, you'll be fine, and you'll progress in your career when you progress, and you don't expect anything, you just come to work, you retire. It's, it's easy. But at least for me, I was told or shown that the corporate life was difficult, a difficult path. You have to try harder. You know what I mean? I don't know if that makes sense, but
It makes a lot of sense. And I think what's important for officers, especially mid-career, that are looking to transition to the private sector, to understand, you go from a government mindset to a corporate mindset. And the corporate mindset is really about results, about impact, it's about delivering. And there's a lot of work out there, and you can maintain your employment if you deliver and you have a very positive impact. And so it takes a certain amount of resolve and guts to just leave the safety blanket, as you said, of law enforcement. But kudos to you. So you mentioned you leverage LinkedIn to build up your network. And as a caveat, I work for the Microsoft Corporation, and LinkedIn is owned by Microsoft. So I just got to throw that disclaimer out there. But it's the best. It is the best medium out there, social media, business social media, to get information and insights. So tell me about when you decided, hey, I want to see what's out there in the private sector. What did you do?
Well, I really started looking at jobs maybe a year and a half ago. And I really just started browsing. I didn't want anyone to know because I hadn't really made up my mind yet. So I went on, actually, I made a LinkedIn first, and then I was looking at the jobs postings, and I had such a broad stroke of what I was looking at because I had no idea really the type of job that I wanted, So I just essentially was browsing. I applied for a handful of positions here and there, but there was never really any method. I was just making resumes that didn't really make sense and applying without a method. And I think that's what kind of changed the game for me, was being more strategic about what I was applying for, how I was applying for the positions, and things like that. So it took me a while to kind of nail down the process, especially coming from law enforcement, where that's not really a part of getting hired because there's state mandated paperwork. It's interesting having to kind of build up your resume and know what you're applying for and why you're applying for it. So that's kind of what I did. Is eventually I figured out exactly what I wanted to do, which helped a lot.
So, how did you figure that out? Did you speak to someone? Did you hire like a consultant to help you with your resume, or you just figured it out?
I did not just figure it out on my own. Absolutely not. So I did hire someone to do my resume. So I hired someone in April of this year. So prior to that, I had spent probably close to a year on my own, just figuring it out, trying to figure it out. And I was really getting nowhere. I had a handful of interviews with different companies, but I never made it past like the second interview. So I was fairly successful in my resumes, but that linked with my interview skills really kind of held me back. So really getting my resume done, and I just picked a company. So I had them gear it towards loss prevention. So that was a big thing, is just making sure your resume, lines up with the job that you want to do. And I had plenty of interview experience, and the interview styles that I saw, and really just how they, I don't want to say score you, but how you're evaluated. It took a while to get the hang of it because it is so different. And I'd say that my interview experience after many rejections and having someone build my resume for me is absolutely what made me successful in finding a job.
Well, what's great to hear is you never gave up, right? A lot of cops, they're super insecure because they're so used to being in charge, right? Large and in charge and getting their way. And now you're in this big, you know, pond, right? You're a little fish, and some adversity like not getting calls back or getting rejected is really tough. So tell me about how many rejections did you receive? How many places you applied for until you landed that job?
I can only estimate because there were so many. I would estimate that I applied for I want to say 150 or 200 positions. I mean, it was a
Okay.
lot.
Wow.
And I heard back from, or let's start with, I did not hear back from probably 75% of those. So I was just completely ghosted. I applied, never heard anything back. A small percentage that I did hear back from were just very generic emails. I heard back from a few about why I was not pushed forward in the process. And then I interviewed with, I don't know, I want to say maybe 10 different companies, varying stages of the process. Total interviews completed, I would say maybe 30 or 40. Phone interviews, Zoom meetings or Teams meetings, things like that. So probably 30 to 40 meetings of different types. So it was a lot. It was many hours of my life. I spent most of the time before I went into work looking on LinkedIn for jobs and or completing interviews. So that was kind of
Well,
my part-time job.
good for you to have the tenacity, and I'm sure it got easier over time, right? After up to 150 applications and then going through about 30 interviews, you get more comfortable about your experience, and you already know you have a core competency in investigations and policing, and just getting the face time in that interview is crucial. So you got it, you nailed that job, you're working now. Tell me, how do you have butterflies in your stomach? I mean, it's only been less than a couple of months. You're so fresh, but this is why I wanted you on the podcast, because you went from being a cop, getting into a traumatic incident, and then deciding this job isn't really for me. I'm ready to leave, to going out there and just finding it. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm still feeling the butterflies. I have quite a commute to work, and every day I spend it, just trying to remember what I've learned from the day before. And it's kind of like whenever I first became a police officer and just got out of training, that feeling of driving into work in your new patrol car, that feeling that you get of, oh man, I did it. So it's kind of the same thing. So yeah, it is. It's very, very nice. Yeah.
Well, you're so fresh in the game, in the corporate game. Caitlin, we're gonna come back and interview you in a couple of years, see where you're at, and I'll be watching your progression in the corporate world, because it is an exciting world. It's way bigger than law enforcement. There's so many avenues where you could end up and land, and even myself, I started off as an investigator because I was a detective when I was in the police department, and I moved all the way up to the top job. So the sky is the limit. The world is your oyster. Caitlin Cusimano, thank you again for being on Cop to Corporate. For those of you out there, subscribe to my YouTube channel and you'll hear more insights, and go to coptocorporate.com. Thanks again, Caitlin.
Yeah, thank you so much.